Hello, seventh graders. So we're going to be starting a brand new unit right after Thanksgiving. And our unit will be on historical fiction. And historical fiction is a genre that takes actual real world events, sometimes real world people, and they're all combined into a story that an author makes up. Very often, some of the characters are not real, or things that happen to the characters aren't real. But in all historical fiction, the setting, the backdrop, the background is something that really happened. So I'm going to show you through a slideshow of one of my all-time favorite historical fiction books called A Long Way from Chicago by Richard Peck, how authors develop a sense of setting, which is time and place, through things like what the characters wore, what kind of homes did they have, what kind of vehicles did they drive, if they even had vehicles at the time, what kind of food did they eat. So we're really going to be looking in this unit on how authors use a variety of clues to really help set the stage for the historical time period that they're going to be writing about. So A Long Way from Chicago begins in 1929, the very beginning of the Great Depression, and each chapter is another summer in each of the following years, and the book ends in 1935. So this book takes us through 6 years of the Great Depression, and what I want to show you is how the author lets us know what the Great Depression looks like. So A Long Way from Chicago takes place in Piatt County, Illinois, and as you can see, it is south of Chicago. The main characters, Joey and his sister Mary Alice, live in Chicago, and every summer they take the train from Chicago, their hometown, to visit their grandma, the wonderful Grandma Dowdell in Piatt County. This is farm country, and it's a lot different from what the kids are used to, so you're going to see in these next slides what it's like to spend the summer with Grandma. So in this particular story, it takes place in the late 1929 to 1935. They talk a lot about the different vehicles that were used. So every summer, Joey and Mary Alice ride the great Wabash Bluebird passenger train from Deering Station in Chicago to Grandma's house, and the train tracks separate Grandma's house from the rest of the town. Grandma has her milk delivered by a milk wagon. Joey's number one all-time dream, his wish, is to become a pilot, and he gets that chance at the county fair when he rides an old biplane that Grandma lies and steals and cheats to get him to ride. And then they also talk about the common cars that were driven in Piatt County, and this is an example of a Model A Ford. And you'll see some of the cooler vehicles in the next couple slides. So again, here's the Wabash Bluebird, and Mary Alice and Joey rode this every summer to Grandma's house. So the Wabash Bluebird is no longer a train. Now we rely on train companies like Amtrak, but this was run by the Wabash Railroad. Next, we have this classy car. One of the characters it's one of Grandma's biggest enemies is Mrs. Weidenbach, the banker's wife. She drives a Hupmobile, and at a time during the Great Depression when people don't have any money and are struggling to get by, Mrs. Weidenbach loves to drive through town in her fancy car. Towards the end of the book, when Joey's getting old enough, I think he's 13, he sees a brand new Terraplane 8 Hudson motor car, and he's able to wangle together $2 whole to get driving lessons. And so $2 for driving lessons, and this is this beautiful Terraplane 8 Hudson motor car that Joey falls head over heels in love with. In the second chapter of the book, we meet the Cowgill family. They run a dairy, and even though they run a successful dairy, it's still 1930, so they use a milk wagon to deliver their milk, and they also use their wagon to go back and forth from their farm to church and their farm to town. And this is Joey's love, Barney Buchanan's biplane, and it gave Joey the ride of his life at the county fair. So that's an example of some of the vehicles. So what we're going to see now is what it would look like to live at Grandma's house in Piatt County, Illinois, especially in the 1920s, 1930s. So Grandma lived in an old farmhouse, and you'll see that one of the shots of in the black and white, that's a picture of the county seat of Piatt County, and Grandma lives not too far from there. You'll see in the picture with the barn, really flat terrain. There are no mountains or hills in this farm country. It's flat as far as the eye can see. So Grandma lives in a farmhouse, and this is be a typical farmhouse in the Midwest, and she lives at the end of town. She has no modern conveniences other than she does have electricity. She has no plumbing, so they use what is commonly called a privy or an outhouse, and Mary Alice, her granddaughter, is petrified to go into the privy because living in Chicago, she has a flushing toilet. The other thing that Grandma has is called a cob house, and that is basically what we would call a shed. And Mary Alice is also afraid of the cob house because it's home to a really mean tomcat. So although Grandma is pretty tough and pretty rough, the kids, when they visit each summer, do have some fun. So we're going to take a look at some of the things that the kids did, some of maybe the famous movie stars, some of the famous movies, some of the things that people in the 1930s did for entertainment. And these are all mentioned in A Long Way from Chicago. So one of Joey's favorite things to do is jigsaw puzzles, and he has a jigsaw puzzle of Charles Lindbergh, who is his all-time hero. Charles Lindbergh was the first American to fly across the Atlantic Ocean, and he flew it in a biplane called the Spirit of St. Louis, and that's something that Joey did every night while he was visiting Grandma. Mary Alice is a couple years younger, so one of her favorite things to do, because she doesn't have any friends at Grandma's house, she likes to play jump rope, and she sings all the old jump rope songs. At Grandma's house, there's not a whole lot to do. It's a poor farming community, but in the summertime, they do hang a sheet in the town park where they show old movies. And one of the movies that Grandma takes the kids to is Dracula, an actual film starring the original Bela Lugosi. And you'll see there's also a picture of Shirley Temple. Mary Alice takes tap dancing lessons because Shirley Temple is her hero, and she wants to be just like her. So in this case, the author actually uses the names of two famous people living during the Great Depression to help you build a sense of time. To help build a sense of believability, the author also talks about three famous people in the story. Talks about Al Capone, a famous gangster, John Dillinger, another famous gangster who is shot up right near Joey and Mary Alice's apartment, and also in the center, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was president of the United States during the time of this story. One of the things that they talk about a lot in this book to give you a sense of how people during the Depression got by was they talk a lot about the food that Grandma prepares. She doesn't have a lot of money, but she always has plentiful food because she grows it herself. So in the county fair chapter, Grandma makes these famous gooseberry pies, which are kind of tart and sour with lots of prickles, just like Grandma. One of the things Grandma was famous for were her breakfasts. They were all you could eat, but you better clean your plate. So, you don't ask for seconds because Grandma loads them down, but you get it. You get up early and you get your full of a Grandma breakfast. And lastly, to help the homeless at the time, they were called drifters, who traveled from town to town looking for jobs or food. Grandma served these drifters some fried catfish that she just happened to poach and steal from the local river, and she served homebrew beer with the catfish and potatoes, which was illegal because of Prohibition. But Grandma didn't care because everything she made, she was kind of willing to share. So you can see this is an actual billboard from the Great Depression. Jobless men keep going. We can't take care of our own. So these men called drifters went from town to town, and Grandma had hard enough to feed them. So you can see in the 1930s, they dressed a whole lot different than we do. Grandma and Mary Alice would have worn pretty simple house dresses. In the center, you would see what a rich lady like Mrs. Weidenbach, the banker's wife, would wear. Her dress would be bought from a store where Grandma would probably make her dresses and Mary Alice's dresses out of feed sacks. And Joey, who is 12 and 13 in the story, is considered to be too old for short pants, but they always wore some sort of cap and a jacket. and lace-up shoes, no shorts and sneakers for boys in the 1930s. So because money was tight, Grandma had to make just about everything that she owned or everything that she used. So she had a treadle sewing machine, which is a foot pump sewing machine that she made all of her clothing and did her repairs. She made her own soap out of ingredients like pork rinds and fatback and potato peels and other disgusting things. She did a lot of mending because she could not afford to buy new clothes. And she canned all of the fruits and vegetables that she raised for the year to get her through any kind of a difficult year. And lastly, even though Grandma didn't have a lot, she had the tools that she needed. She prided herself in her Winchester 20 gauge shotgun, and she used it more than a few times on people that didn't really respect her space or give her privacy. They used an axe all the time. They cut off the heads of catfish, and Joey was always splitting firewood. And even though Grandma did have electricity, they used gas or oil-based railroad lanterns to light their way and to solve some of the problems. So all of these items in this slideshow are clues that the author adds to the story to really build a sense of time and place. You're going to read a short story by Truman Capote called A Christmas Memory. And in this story, what I'm going to ask you to be looking for are some clues. What are some things that the author puts into the story to describe the time? So that would be vehicles, clothing, equipment, tools, utilities, things like that. And then you're also going to be listening for and looking for clues that describe the place. What kind of homes did they live in? What was the terrain like? What kind of trees did they have? Did they have dirt roads, paved roads? So you're going to read and enjoy A Christmas Memory. I'm also going to include the audio so that some of the language is a little tricky. So hopefully if you can read along, you will enjoy this wonderful introduction to historical fiction.